Thanks, Clark. And we're now in public session. Can I have a warm welcome to everyone to this meeting of the Education Committee? I'll move to agenda item 1, apologies. Are members aware of any apologies?
Harry Harvey, Chair.
I don't know about Diane Dodds, Chair. I suspect she will be an apology.
Okay, so Diane and Harry Harvey, that's great. And I know there's been a couple of logistical challenges with one or two others as well. Agenda item 2 then, Clark, is Chairperson's business. 2.1 is the report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules at page 3 of your tabled papers. The Examiner is content with the technical aspects of SR 2022/45, the Education Curriculum Minimum Content Amendment Order, Northern Ireland 2022, which was approved by the committee at its meeting on the 23rd of February 2022. That is in relation to CPR, and isn't it, Mark? Yeah. Yep.
Sorry, Chair.
That's in relation to CPR provision, yeah?
Yeah, so the committee has already written to the department to say that it is satisfied with the CPR statutory rule subject to the agreement of the examiner, and now that's the agreement of the examiner, which has been communicated to both us and to the department.
Okay, members content to note, agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay then, agenda item 2.2, can I refer members to a Freedom of Information request at page 11 of tabled papers? The committee office has acknowledged the request and passed it to the FOI unit for further action. Members content to note, agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. And agenda item 3 then is draft minutes. Can I refer members to draft minutes of the committee meeting on the 8th of March, 9th of March and 10th of March at pages 6, 9 and 16 of your packs? Are members content that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings? Agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. There are no matters arising, and agenda item 5 is correspondence. Can I refer members to page 22, where we have 7 items of correspondence and a summary note at page 23. Clark, do you wish to speak to the correspondence, please?
Yes, Chair. Again, we have on page 57 on page 44 correspondence regarding concerns about the Integrated Education Bill. This is a kind of standardised letter that the committee has received several of. Are members content that, as before, we write to the correspondent referring them to the committee report on the consideration of the bill?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thanks, Deputy Chair. Item 5.8 on page 13 of tabled papers is correspondence from the Association of Educational Psychologists seeking a meeting with the committee, with the chairperson in the first instance and the committee itself. Ordinarily, we would advise that the committee should schedule an informal meeting. Members, how are your diaries? Do you think you have another meeting in you before the end?
Probably best for that to go on to the forward work programme for the next committee. Yeah. That makes sense.
Right again to the new committee.
Yeah, we could organise a meeting, but who knows what way business is going to go next week, and we might end up with very few being able to attend. So
no problem.
Best to put it off, I think.
Okay, if we include that in the work programme for the next committee, that's great.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, members.
And that's all I have for correspondence, Chair.
Okay, are members content to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 23 with the above exceptions? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 6 then, members, is forward work programme, which is at page 47 of your packs. Clark, do you want to speak to the forward work programme briefly?
Just, Chair, we're trying to have the Minister come and give a final day brief next Wednesday. She is unavailable and I then asked would the permanent secretary be able to attend, and he is not going to be here. So we just have some finishing up of the committee's own business scheduled for next week. There was an option there to go to the Forest School or the Guiding Centre. I would just need a steer from members as to what they might like to do for their last meeting.
Members, I'm content for us to respond to the Department of Education to advise that if the Minister or the Permanent Secretary can be available at any other mutually convenient time, that we would make ourselves available in lieu of that to take another senior official on the 23rd of March to engage in a final day brief capacity, given that there are some live issues, some serious live issues, and not least in relation to free school meal provision and childcare provision. Further to recent briefings, would members be content with that approach?
Content, Chair.
Okay. Is that helpful, Clark? I mean, obviously, we in lieu of any other business, the committee meeting next Wednesday will be necessary to agree our legacy report at the very least, which is obviously an extremely important document to have agreed, to have considered properly, and for members to have anything they wish to included in it, and then to agree it in order to leave a constructive record of what we have prioritised and a useful guide for the next committee. Yeah.
Yes, Chair. I mean, is the committee interested in having like a youth engagement item or anything there, or are you content that a potential final day brief and a legacy report is adequate material for your last meeting?
I think it's potentially best that we give it that focus. Would members agree?
I agree with that, Chair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks, Clark. Welcome, Robbie. We've just proceeded through committee business there, just to get you up to speed, and agreed correspondence and forward work programme. With 3 briefings to follow here from STEAM NI, the department on teachers' pension scheme, and budget update from RAISE. Happy enough?
Yeah, Chair. Justin's just beside me here, trying to log in. So
okay. I'll give you both a moment there to try and get logged in, and apologies about any mix-up, obviously. Okay, members. So agenda item 7 is going to be our oral briefing from STEAM NI. Can I refer members to the presentation from STEAM NI at page 16 of your tabled papers? Give a warm welcome to Sinead McGleenan, Client and Schools Engagement Executive with STEAM NI, Dr. Alice Darcy, Director of STEAM Education Limited, Professor Colette Murphy, Professor of Education at Trinity College Dublin, Louth McMahon, Technical Development Manager at Regen Waste, and Tiernan O'Hare, Executive Assistant at Regen Waste. You're all very welcome this morning. We're delighted to be able to meet with you and to hear from you on this important topic of STEAM. Can I advise you that the committee will be able to give you up to 10 minutes for your opening presentation, and then time for questions from all our members, which can be answered from across your panel of witnesses. We're delighted to have you with us this morning, and I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. We're delighted to be here. I'll just share my screen and make sure everyone can see and hear me. Okay, 1 second now. My presentation is not coming up.
No problem.
Just give me 1 second. Obviously, this worked perfectly in the test that we did the other day. Okay, there we go.
Sorry, can you hear me, Alice?
I can, Sinead, yeah.
That's fine. Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
I'll just go to slideshow, and you can let me know if you can see that okay.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
super. Brilliant.
Great.
Thanks, Alice.
So yeah, thanks very much for having us. It's a pity we couldn't be there in person in the planetarium. That would have been fantastic, but needs must. So I will crack on. So my name is Alice Darcy. I'm the MD of STEAM Education, which stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts and Maths. We're a Cork-based multidisciplinary team, and we work with industry and academia all over the island of Ireland to support and enhance primary education. So essentially our mission is to inspire children in these subject areas, support them to develop creative and critical thinking skills, and to fulfill their potential while also supporting the STEM sector in industry.
There's a phrase I kick about, and it came from another guy from a couple of years ago.
Yes. Oh, sorry, was that to me? Will I continue?
I'm not sure who that was from, Alice. Sorry. Yeah, I think you're
okay.
saying.
I'll continue.
Thank you.
Okay, so what we do is we develop these STEAM programs. We match STEM companies with primary schools, and we train their scientists, engineers, and other professionals to deliver the programs. We also work with teachers and schools to do teacher training and CPD. We're going into the area of youth work a little bit, and we've also done some work with the elderly, so we can talk about that later on as well. You can just see in the inset video there a few little examples of how hands-on, colourful and creative our programs are. So the team, there's 10 of us at the moment, that's myself. So just to give you a little bit of my background, I'm a scientist originally, but in parallel I also worked in stop motion animation, video production, creative facilitation and art therapy. So my colleague Sinead McLeanan is here today. Sinead is our Northern representative. We have Colette Murphy, as you mentioned, who's been on our advisory board from the beginning. And the company was actually founded by Seamus Devlin, a Tyrone native. So what I'll talk about first is a little bit of why STEAM rather than just STEM, and how we do it. So first, why STEAM? STEAM is a more holistic approach to education in which creativity is really, really important. We engage that in and through all subjects. The second most important thing is to develop critical thinking skills in children. So essentially teaching children how to reason. We develop connections across the curriculum, but also into, real life situations. It's very participatory and collaborative approach, very hands-on. So children really love learning by doing. So every week they actually do projects and activities and experiments. We make it really relevant to their age group, and obviously, really importantly, it's fun. And most of our work at the moment is with primary schools, and this was on purpose because so P5, 6 and 7, or 4th, 5th and 6th here. So this age group is a really important time in a child's development, in brain development. They're really like sponges at this age, with very open minds. So, and also their brains are developing new pathways. So it's a really, really important time to engage their interest in as many different areas as possible, but also to engage with as many positive and diverse role models as possible. We use a co-teaching model in most of our work, so that connects a STEM or STEAM expert with the primary teacher to maximise the benefits to both the children and the teachers, and also provide really interesting CPD experiences and communications with the industry partners. So we've been working on an all-island approach. Just to give you an idea of the scale of how we're working, there's about 4,000 primary schools in the Republic and another 806, I think, in the north. This map here shows the scattering. Each of those spots represents a school that we're working with in partnership, most of them in partnership with companies in STEAM programs. So far, we've reached about 16, I think it's closer to 18,000 children, 150 primary schools, about 50 STEM companies around the country, as well as some local authorities and other philanthropic supporters. So it's going pretty well. We had started working in the north so just before the pandemic, really. So we're a little behind schedule on our plans, but we will crack on. And to give a little close-up on what the work we are doing in the North, I'm going to hand you over to Sinead McGleenan.
Thank you, Alice. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me this morning. As Alice said, my name is Sinead McGleenan, and I'm from Armagh, and I'm a primary school teacher for over 20 years, and at present on a career break working with STEAM education in the North, and I'm a STEM advocate. Thanks, Alice. Now, as Alice has said, we're all over Ireland, but my area would be the North, and we are involved with various companies, as you can see. But most recently, we have been supported by Almac, and they have delivered Science in a Box programs to 12 primary schools in the North, all over the North. We are also involved with Regen, and Louth and Tiernan are here at the minute, our two engineers. And Regen are a local waste company, management company, and they are at present involved in the co-teaching with 3 schools in the Armagh area. And here we have a picture of when I went into the school, and we can see Louth and Tiernan as the engineers, and it was in the local papers. And it really was a fantastic programme, and the Louth and Tiernan loved delivering it, and the teachers loved it, and most of all the children. And you can hear from Louth and Tiernan later on during the questions. Thanks, Alice. In the North, we have some problems with regard to STEM and STEAM, as similar to the South. There has been a lot of research and a lot of papers and interventions as we're aware of, and also we want to continue to develop skills, but there's still areas we need to concentrate on, such as resources, teachers' confidence, CPD, curriculum professional development, teacher professional learning, the time spent actually teaching science, because I feel this has been diluted because of the world around us. A lot of teachers seem to go towards the history and geography rather than the science. Again, that's due to their confidence. And also there have been a lot of interventions, but the sustainability of these is an area. And I have, after the STEM review of 2009, I was actually involved in a secondment to our board, where we went out to different schools to co-teach to different cohorts, and this was extremely successful, and that is why STEAM appealed to me, because this is of a similar vein. So while there's lots of significant progress, there's many areas and challenges that still remain. So as I said, there's various research documents, but I'll draw your attention to the TIMS report. So again, it's looking at the science, the time spent teaching science, 38 hours compared with 75 hours, and as I said, there has been progress, but the skills, applying the skills, is down by 7 points. And also teachers' confidence. In other documents, it explains how the education experience and outcomes for children and young people are the most important factors. And these still ring true today, because we want to encourage the teachers, and by using this resource and having the expertise of the co-teacher, of the engineer or the scientist, it's really a win-win scenario, because the teacher gets CPD via the scientist or the engineer, and the main winners are the children. Thanks, Alice. So in a recent Drawing the Future document, children's career aspirations, perceptions are formed at a young age. So that's why it's essential we begin this process in primary school. Children's career aspirations are most influenced by who they know. So really, if you see it, you can be it. And worrying less than 1% of children have heard about jobs through people from the world of work coming to their school. So that's why STEAM with this co-teaching approach is essential, and it works. That's basically it. Thanks, Alice.
Thanks, Sinead. So Sinead has touched there on quite a few of the problems that are common and some of the work that's been done to solve them. As you all know, we're also in the midst of a biodiversity crisis, climate crisis, and an energy transition. So education and early intervention is really, really critical. We're obviously aligned with some of the Sustainable Development Goals, including quality education, gender equality, also working with industry, innovation and infrastructure. We have a focus on energy programs, so we also supporting education around affordable and clean energy, climate action, which is our most recent program, and partnerships for the goals. So the partnership approach really is proving really successful and really important. So just to touch on there, so again, climate action, I think is a very good example of STEAM and why STEAM, the bringing in creativity and the arts and design, they're important across all subjects, but I think it's even more obvious in the climate action area that we need all skills, all talents, and collaboration between people with different skill sets to really make progress in this area. It's also an area where I'm sure you're aware the energy companies have very strong community benefit obligations. So they are ready, willing and able to support in this area. So just in a nutshell, how it works when we work with companies is the company generally chooses the program that matches their sector, employee skills and CSR goals. They pick a program. We support them to find volunteers that are suitable, train the volunteers. We provide all the kit, which is curriculum linked, hands-on materials. And we also then do positive PR and communications with the companies. So just a quick flick through some examples of lessons that, again, very hands-on, practical applications. It's not all about academic achievement. It's about every child getting a chance to experience different areas, different sectors, and how their particular talents might be developed in that area. So there's a lot of benefits, obviously, to the children in the schools. Also a lot of benefits to the companies in terms of CSR, earlier intervention for sort of a long-term supply chain of graduates, apprentices and employees. The industry education links are also very beneficial because the schools then understand the spectrum of opportunities that probably exist in a lot of their local communities and they may not be aware of them. CPD for everybody involved, positive PR and working towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So pre-COVID, visits to schools and visits of schools to companies and vice versa were very, very popular and very positive. So hopefully we can go back to that soon on a bigger scale. This is actually a 5-minute clip, so I won't play the whole thing for you, but we can come back to it in the panel if you wish. So it's like we've had, you don't need to take our word for it, I guess, if that the programs work, because we have fantastic feedback and testimonials from all sides, really. And that's why we have Louth and Tiernan hopefully here today as well to speak from the industry perspective. So I'm conscious of your time, and I think we've probably went through that quite fast. But thank you for listening. I'm sure there's plenty of questions, so I will stop the share and you can let us know what you think.
Thanks very much indeed, Alice. It's a brilliant presentation. The work you're doing is fantastic. And the benefits are multi-layered. Sometimes we think that obviously the key mission is to inspire children into STEM and art subjects and to link those with creativity, critical thinking skills that are vital for the industry and for careers and for the world of work. But I think that last slide or one of the last slides you showed there, the big 6 benefits, shows just how beneficial it is for the STEAM industry and companies involved in STEAM skills, just how beneficial it is for them to buy into this as well in terms of sustaining the sector. So I think that's absolutely fantastic. What I know you'll have touched on it briefly there, but what is the scale of buy-in and the scale of provision in terms of the sector and school partnerships in Northern Ireland, north of Ireland in particular?
In the north in particular, as I said, we were really ramping up just before COVID hit, and so we had to kind of scale back again then. But We've currently Almac and Regen are the two that are like running programs this year. We also had the Nocton Foundation support a school in every single county in a slightly different model in which the schools, we also provide support to schools where the schools can do it themselves, but we provide the training. So at the moment, that's about 50 schools in total in the north of Ireland. Obviously, we have a lot more to do, and the more that we can connect with industry to get involved, the better, obviously. Like what I find with industry all over the island of Ireland is that they're all really happy to engage and support, and there's loads of industries kind of doing their own, trying to develop their own programs. Whereas what we're doing, I suppose, is trying to provide a framework that's actually curriculum linked so that it supports not just the industry side of it in pockets, but something that can be scaled and raise all boats together to the same level. So ideally, like if we had, you know, if you have all primary schools doing STEAM programs to some degree, when they get to secondary school, you're not creating then disadvantage between those who have done extra and those who have not, or children who just haven't had a great experience. We also know that in research-backed information that if children, and particularly girls, have negative experiences about, for example, STEM subjects, so let's say maths in particular, before they're 12 or 13, you're fighting then to bring them back instead of engaging them positively early to bring them forward. So there's a huge appetite out there with industry. Industry tends to be doing a lot with secondary schools. It's bringing them into the primary school level that we're primarily working on.
That maybe leads me into my next question then as well. So yeah, I would agree with you in that sense that there are projects happening, but the lack of, is there a lack of a framework linking it all together? And you insert this interesting concept here of co-teaching, connecting industry, STEAM industry experts with schools, with teachers, in order to deliver STEM, deliver and inspire STEM education. It begs the question, should the Department of Education be doing more? What more do you think it could do to try and mainstream or more mainstream that co-teaching industry and teachers together, particularly on subjects that really require that real world industry linkage to inspire the relevance of the skills being learnt in the school? What is the Department of Education in Northern Ireland doing to try and make that a more mainstream approach, a more rolled out approach, a more comprehensive approach, or what more could they be doing? Is that a fair question?
Oh, absolutely. I might bounce that one to Sinead or Colette, who have a lot more experience on the ground and have been involved in the initiatives in the North previous to this. So
I was, and then Colette, I let you, because Colette knows, is the expert in co-teaching, but I was involved with co-teaching after the STEM review in 2009, and it was...
Sinead, can I pause you for 1 second, actually, now that I just think about it, and ask you to lead in with what co-teaching is before you go to the rest of your answer? I think that'd be helpful. Yeah.
Colette, do you want to explain the co-teaching?
Yeah, I think maybe I've been working on co-teaching for more than 20 years. And it is what we have been doing in STEAM education with the co-teaching. And this is something that the government can think about in terms of education, which is we were using the idea of induction for teachers and industry people to come together. And so during the induction, so that both groups were prepared for what was happening in the classroom, because co-teaching is all about sharing expertise. So the industry people have you could call them the science experts or whatever, and the teachers are also brilliant, obviously, at working with children in school and all that. I mean, we've all done that probably here. And but the co-teaching means that the teacher and the industry scientists, or whatever we want to call them, they both benefit from the other, because the people, when they come from industry and they start working with children, their communication is improving more and more and more, and working with the teacher instead of an expert coming in, talking to kids, and the teacher's at the back or not there at all. So this business where they're sharing, so it brings education and industry together, you know, from a governmental level. It's massive. And so this whole idea of sharing expertise, and the children seem to benefit mostly, but at the same time, both the teachers are benefiting a lot from actually doing science with their kids, with the help of the industry people. And so the whole thing is, I mean, I've been doing research on this for years. I've written 3 books on it. So, and it is, as long as the induction is done well. So we had them in the STEAM Ed, we had the teachers and industry people who were going to teach together. And they were doing the practice of the activities that they're going to do with the students, with the kids. And so they're doing that together in a free area. In the induction, we just use, you know, different places to have the induction classes in. And so they know each other now when they go in. It's not 2 strangers meeting. They've been working together. They've been planning lessons together before they go. So it's a real hands-on way of working. And it's a collaboration that we often lack, because everything's put into boxes and files with lots of words. But this is actually, you know, I think the best way to get into STEAM education, STEM education in Ireland, the whole country, north and south, definitely. Okay.
Thanks, Colette. I'll bring Sinead back in there as well, but just before I do, or maybe with Sinead as well, how is it resourced? How is it? I think it makes perfect sense, and I see in one of your slides as well, and in a previous employment and learning committee, I would have been involved in an inquiry into careers, education, advice, information and guidance. And I see in one of the slides here that Drawing the Future report from the OECD found that less than 1% of children have heard about jobs through people from the world of work coming to their school. When this committee has frequently discussed the need for that interaction in order to inspire children and young people about the world of work. So the co-teaching model makes it so much sense, particularly to try and address that concerningly low lack of linkage between the world of work and pupils in inspiring them into education. I suppose in addition to the way it works is how is it resourced? How is it financed? How does that model function from a resource and administrative point of view? And I'm conscious I cut across.
I'll take that
again. Yeah.
So the short answer is industry pays. In our model at the moment, industry largely pays. As I say, we have some local authority support, in which case individual councils, for example, they might be involved in supporting particularly disadvantaged areas. Like Cork was a UNESCO City of Learning, and attached to that we had a Learning Neighbourhoods programme funded and supported by the council. So they supported schools in those areas. And then philanthropic supporters. But I'm also conscious that Tiernan and Lau, they're there, so they can tell you from, like, essentially the companies pay us, we provide the programs, we provide the training, we do the logistics, we do the GDPR, the consents, all of those things. But essentially at the moment, the whole thing is, I would say, 80% industry supported. Okay. So I might does Lau or Tiernan, do you want to jump in there and just speak from the industry side of that?
Good morning. Lau here. Sorry, I'm having a few issues with the camera here this morning, so you can't get a good look at me. I have to say, from a regen point of view, we got involved in this project through Sinead back early in the year, and like myself, I'm an engineer now for over 22 years, so a lot of industry knowledge around the program. But I was quite surprised at how the impact it seemed to have on the children. I kind of thought, I'm going to go in and I'm going to talk about my day-to-day job. And as chance would have it, the first school I went into, my own daughter was in the class. So she's well familiar with what I do on a day-to-day basis, but takes no interest in it. But when I was delivering the program put together by STEAM with Tiernan, and was able to relate what they had put in the program to what I did as a day-to-day basis, and more than that, stuff that was happening in their local area that they weren't aware of. But that was the bit that it surprised me. The interest that they took in, this is all happening on our doorstep. I mean, we're a local recycling firm. We're based in Newry. So we were able to talk about, right, kids, this is all the stuff that goes in your household waste bins. This is where it ends up. But we were able to relate so much of that through the program to the kids that, that really grabbed their attention. And it's something that we have been, and we've discussed this myself and Tiernan at length, separate to STEAM, is that thing of inspiring the children to get into STEAM and get into engineering in particular and solve these problems. We have a great tradition in this country of developing very, very innovative and technical minded people who are very, very good at solving a lot of problems. But we lose them to, other places. And the reason we lose them for other places is because they don't realize that there is so much opportunity on their own doorstep. So what we see is that this is a massive opportunity for us to put ourselves in front of children and inspire them to not only be the best that they can be in the field of engineering, but also these jobs exist in your area. This is local employment. We're looking at the future of our business coming down the line, and that's what we're trying to try and inspire in these kids. And Tiernan, will agree with me. We felt that the influence that we had with the kids through the STEAM project, the feedback that we got from the kids, I mean, and I was, it was useful for me. I was able to get more feedback from my own daughter who was in the class from her friends, and they really, really took to A, the program in general, but B, the fact that it was people local to them delivering the program, and it was where they could then start to see, there's maybe a job potential for me in the future. I could be an electrical engineer working in Regen or in Norbrook or in any of the companies around Newry and Mourne and the greater Northern Ireland area. These jobs do exist local to me. So we're actually looking at the minute even how we can sort of branch out even into the secondary level education. We do a lot of work with the Southern Regional College around apprentices and stuff like that. So it's not just a long. We're looking at the long-term picture of how we develop our local employees for years to come. So that's where we really should very benefit to this program, not just from an education point of view, but to the local economy in its entirety.
Thanks for that.
Thanks, Louth. If I can just follow up on that, Chris, I think so, and we alluded to it earlier, what we're bringing together is the combination of all these things. So there are loads of resources out there, and there's resources out the wazoo that teachers can just download off the internet. But without the support of, an expert or someone who has more training in a science or engineering or technology or art or whatever the subject is than them, they're already under pressure to get their jobs done. So we need to support them more in that way. And they're really open to that support coming in. And the way that we work it, so it's like CPD in the classroom, obviously it saves them having to go outside to find other CPD. It also changes their perception of how science and engineering and all of these subjects work. And by combining that with really understanding that creativity is not separate from these subjects. Philosophy, humanities, these aren't separate from science. If you do anything in science, the decision-making process of how we roll that out in society is a combination of subjects. So essentially by bringing all of these things together, and also, as I say, like really progressive companies like Regen, trying to find the best ways to engage both with children and their communities. We can't expect them to know how well children operate in particular situations. So we're having worked in these fields for decades, are bringing that knowledge together and plugging their expertise into it. So it really is a multidisciplinary, multi-partner kind of an area. How we are funded at the moment is almost all industry. I would absolutely love to have government support on both sides, or the Department of Education. And to be perfectly honest, in the very long term, if the Departments of Education adopted this to a degree that was so good that worked us out of business, I would also be happy with that, because the ultimate goal is to empower the children as well as supporting the development of a healthier society with a good STEM sector and jobs for everybody. So yeah, there's a lot going on. We would appreciate any support that we can get from any area. But I think public-private partnerships are a very positive contribution.
Yeah, really interesting, forward thinking work. Alice, I'm keen to bring some of our other MLAs in here to engage with you as well. Maybe we can get Sinead and Tiernan back in on that part. Apologies if I cut across you there, Sinead, but the points are being really well made across the board here. Can I bring in Deputy Chairperson Pat Sheehan, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to all our guests this morning. That's a very interesting presentation. I'm just wondering, first of all, Alison, picking up a bit on a point that Chris touched on. Is this in some way, this project, is it in some way a substitute for lack of careers advice within schools, particularly in the primary sector? Thanks.
I think that first of all, people generally, we tend to underestimate the sophisticated level of thinking that occurs in children aged 10, 11, 12. So I think in terms of overall in education, careers advice hasn't served children that well. And even in secondary school, I think the approach to it is too narrow. Like, people get into, like, small dinosaur enthusiasts become paleontologists, not because they were told about paleontology, because they were interestingly entertained and taught about dinosaurs. So I think it's just that the approach in primary school in particular should be that there are lots of different fields and your skills can be developed, your talents can be developed in lots of ways. And then in secondary school, absolutely go much narrower on the careers, which is one of the reasons why, so company by company, like every scientist and engineer that we work with, they don't only focus on their own specific area of, let's say, engineering. So Louth and Tiernan would have been teaching about all the different sectors of engineering, but flavouring that with the stories of their own company and their job and how it works in real life. But we give them a very broad and open, expansive kind of view of the different careers that are available. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for that, Alice. And I mean, I suppose I'm thinking a lot about young boys, particularly from working class backgrounds. And, you know, the evidence from your own presentation is that the children go into careers, you know, where they have been influenced by others who are already in those careers at an early age. And if you're talking about working class kids, you know, their fathers, and particularly boys, their fathers are maybe bricklayers or plumbers or electricians and so on. And young boys want to follow their fathers into that particular career path. Whereas if they were aware, you know, that studying science could lead them into engineering, whereas instead of just building a wall, they could be responsible for the construction of a whole, you know, multi-story building and so on, or a bridge or a motorway or whatever, you know, and I think that's where careers advice is there's a big deficit in the careers advice in our schools. So, no, and I agree with what you have said there. And just... Sorry, go ahead.
If I could just respond to that, so we do work with a lot of DESH schools, so disadvantaged areas. We work with a lot of schools where academic pursuits, I suppose, wouldn't be absolutely top of the list. And I think really the huge success of the approach that we use is that it doesn't alienate any child, whether they don't think they're good at something, whether they don't think they're brainy enough to do something. And we put the opportunities in a very relatable way. So they get to try everything. It's not even like we're not directly giving them career advice. We're saying, try all these different fields. And if you have a feel for one of them, we can support you to go further in that direction. So I think it's also just about, rather than top down telling people this is engineering and here's how to get a job, it's, let's try all this. How would we solve a problem for humanity if we were engineers and we were working on this? And here's how you might fit into it.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. Thanks for that. Just moving on to a slightly different point. Previously, when I was at school anyway, which wasn't today or yesterday, children were sort of segregated, and ones who were good at maths and science, others who were good at the arts and music or painting or whatever. And there were clear sort of defining lines. And although it was said that children who were good at the maths would also be good at languages because there were sort of similar cognitive processes at use. And I'm just wondering, and it's interesting to see the arts connected in with the STEM subjects here. Is there any research to show that there is some sort of cognitive connection between all of those subjects? Thanks.
Absolutely. There's a whole, like the research, the most up-to-date research in neuroscience and brain development really debunks a lot of those things that separate like one specific area of your brain. If you have that one well developed, you'll be good at this specific skill. Brains are actually a lot more complicated than that. I'll also say that creativity is inherent in the evolution of brains. Creativity is in every single part of it. So nothing actually breaks my heart more than hearing a child or an adult say, "Oh, I'm not creative at all." To me, that suggests that somebody has taught them very poorly. So yes, there is absolutely oodles of research to suggest that these subjects are not separately developed in your brain. Also, I think we imposed an artificial separation on them years ago. If you look at, like Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, all of the very influential people were polyglot, like they operated in many subject areas across the board simultaneously. So yeah, I think all of the research really is showing that we shouldn't separate the skills so much, and especially not at the age group of primary school.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. And that's all the questions I have, so I'll hand back to the chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
Sorry, thanks, Pat. Could I bring in Robin Newton, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. And I think you had the opportunity to ask all the interesting questions, or at least the questions that were in my mind. So I really just one question, Chair, to whoever wants to address it. And it really is about the competition, or what other initiatives are there in Northern Ireland that would be of a similar nature and which are promoted by the Department of Education in Northern Ireland schools.
Sinead, do you want to take that? You've been involved in a lot of them yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, Alice. Yeah, there are lots of initiatives in the north and all over Ireland, and various like STEM ambassadors. I'm actually a member of the Primary Science Teaching Trust, and there's also Sentinus. And as I said, after the STEM review, I was involved with the Education Department. I was seconded to the board for co-teaching with science in different areas in Armagh, to go out and teach in the grassroots with the teacher, the co-teaching method. But again, that was stopped due to funding. So there are lots of things available out there as well. And there's lots, as Alice said, online. But it's the great thing about STEAM is we're actually in the classroom with the teacher. And this, as a teacher myself, this is what I think is essential. When you get the resource, when you've got the expertise, you're in the class, you're learning, the teacher's learning, and the children ultimately are the main winners of it all. So there are, probably that's your answer, there are lots of other. Would you like to add to that, Alice?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of room. Like there's, nearly 5,000 primary schools on the island. We are nowhere near covering all of them with what I would suggest would be the level of enhanced primary education that we would like to reach. I think, like in the Republic, I know many private education companies, some charities, social enterprises, all working either geographically different locations or specifically on different subjects like coding specialists, that sort of thing. So I think there's room, to be honest, for there's room for more. I guess what I would like to see is a bit more of a framework discussion about, if we're going to use and accept and we really want the support of the industry sectors, could we create some sort of baseline at which they come in so that we support the education system collectively. But at the moment, we have to just, I guess, crack on in the model that we're using. And we are obviously very open to discussions about how that could be used to benefit the education system overall.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Can I bring in Daniel McCrossan, MLA, please, if the technology's working for Daniel?
Yes, Chair, I'm trying to get this laptop plugged in here, sorry.
That's great. We can hear you loud and clear, thanks.
Thanks very much. You can hear me okay, yeah? Yeah. Okay, thanks very much for your presentations, for being with us. I'll go straight to questions because we're tight for time. You tell us that STEAM intends to develop and deliver curriculum-linked deep interventions. Have you done this with specific reference to the Northern Ireland curriculum developed by SIA? And is SIA aware of your work, and have you sought what they think about your approach to learning?
In reverse order, I would say no, we haven't discussed with them. Yes, we do we work from the curriculum that the schools have to work from, and we see how can we help the teachers to fulfill that curriculum, but also push it towards a better level of education that is more research linked, more up to date and more relevant to their lives. But now the only reason I would say that we haven't spoken to them, and we have briefly spoken to the curriculum body in the Republic, is, well, we're a small company and we're flat out busy. We reach out when we can. Also, because we're a private company, I suppose there is the issue of the national bodies are, a little bit separate from that. So we would be very happy to talk to them. We just haven't gotten there yet.
Okay. Can you outline what is meant by deep interventions?
Deep interventions. So let's say if Louder Tiernan, for example, were to go and visit a school and give a 1 hour talk, perhaps about their job, I wouldn't class that as a deep intervention. I'd class that as very useful communication and awareness raising. What I would consider deep intervention is that we support on multiple levels. So we've looked at everything from the teacher's perspective, from the school's perspective, from the company perspective, and from the child's perspective, with research backing, and collectively based on many years of experience in education and science and the other subjects, we've put it together to really try and multiply the benefits, including obviously with co-teaching. So that's what I would mean by deep intervention.
Okay, and how do you measure the success of your program?
Well, we have done a series of reviews. So a few years ago, we did a 3-year review of a fixed number of schools that had been involved 3 years in a row. So we did obviously research with the principals of the schools, the teachers in the schools, the scientists that delivered it, and the children. And we had got really great results out of that. We get feedback every year from all parties, and we iteratively improve our programs on that basis. Now, what I would really love to do is to, in association with universities, is to do a very long-term impact assessment, which I'm sure Colette can tell you in detail how challenging that is, especially with children and that age group and tracking them. But that is ultimately the way that we would try and measure the long-term output.
Okay, that's good. Okay.
Could I just say from a curriculum
Sinead,
point of
yeah,
view?
go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. The area of transition from primary to secondary, this is particularly appropriate for, because when teaching this, you find that in our program, there's language there that you say to the children about science or engineering that is then brought on in the secondary school. So this is something I have found that it's a very good option for transitioning with in the curriculum.
Okay, thank you for that, Sinead. You describe STEAM as a holistic approach to education. So what is meant by holistic, and how is STEAM holistic?
It's holistic because we don't focus entirely on like a small area of any of one subject. So in every program that we do, so even if we're doing engineering in a box, for example, we include though our overall focus is about the engineering sector, what's included is a bit about the science of engineering, so physics, maths. We talk about the application, the creativity, design aspects. We try and connect it to other things in the curriculum that the schools or the kids might be involved in. So like if there's a green school and they've been doing their water flag, one of our lessons in engineering is about environmental engineering, and we use the example and activity of making a little water purification system. So we try and cross-link that to what's already happening in the schools in a way that the kids can understand and attach to their life.
Okay, that's good. And just further that, how do you develop and I suppose measure the development of critical thinking skills?
Oh, much like in our reviews, we do question the children. And Colette's been working on research with these age groups for many years. So we ask them different questions about how they get on. I suppose, speaking personally, as somebody that I teach one or two myself every year just to sort of ground truth it. Immediately you can see the change in the child when they go from not understanding something to understanding and reasoning through. And one of the reasons our programs aren't once off or like a different person every week is because you need a minimum timeline for them to develop a relationship and to be comfortable enough to ask questions that they might be wrong in and to connect the dots. So individually, I know that every co-teacher who's ever done this and teacher will have seen the change. Measuring these things is not a simple operation whatsoever, but we are working on it.
That's good. Alice, we could be doing with you and Colette and Co up at the Assembly. There's a fair amount of MLAs could be doing with a bit of development in their critical thinking skills.
Well, I would say I don't think our approach is specific to any age group. As I say, we've worked with elderly people, most recently in Donegal. Sinead did a great silver science project. I've actually done a STEAM workshop with the Cork City Council, the grown-ups. So it is definitely transferable.
Daniel's
if you want it.
Daniel's volunteering there by the sounds of things.
I have a list of people I'd like to volunteer, though, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Daniel.
Thanks very much.
Can I bring in Robbie Butler, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you so much. Hello from sunny County Armagh and the Armagh Planetarium. Myself and my SDLP colleague Justin McNulty didn't get the memo that we were supposed to be just working as we had been. But I just want to thank the staff here at the Armagh Planetarium for opening their doors, connecting us into Wi-Fi and allowing us to spend some time here. It's absolutely lovely. So hopefully in the next mandate we will be able to pull together that meeting, Chair. I know you'll not be Chair of the Education Committee at that stage, but you're more than welcome to join us and we'll maybe stand you a coffee. Thank you so much for your presentation, Steam. Really, really, really useful. And I'm going to be honest, most of the questions that I had down have been asked, but I'll ask this question in one go. And hopefully if you get the answer right, then I won't need to dip back into it. So one of the things that I'm particularly passionate about is ensuring that all pupils, irrespective of age, gender, diversity, ability, whether they have a special education need, whether they have a physical disability or a learning disability, have absolute access to all of the benefits of a curriculum. So can you demonstrate to me just how you guys have faced into this at this stage, what challenges you see or have identified, what we need to do to ensure that in instances like this that all pupils do have equal access? And I'm thinking particularly, I know a great priority of yours is linking up the career pathway. There was a brilliant piece that you put in there about, the career pathway and what that looks like. And at the moment, if you know somebody, you're more likely to go in there, where this type of thing obviously opens up different avenues and different doors. But obviously we want to live in a world where there's no barrier. There's and if somebody needs an additional aid to get somewhere, that we do that. So where do you guys kind of fit in with that, and where do you see the greatest challenges?
Well, the greatest challenge I think with that is that we're a small company operating outside of the Department of Education. So while I would absolutely love to make this available to every single school with no barriers, the reality is the cost is currently prohibitive. Now, I wouldn't say it's that you couldn't overcome it. There are many changes that could be made within the education system itself. There are also thousands and thousands of STEM companies around the country that could be mobilized to support this. But we'll say cost and us just getting to people and, getting to everyone in the time available and the money available is one challenge. Another challenge I would see is obviously in built up urban areas and, clusters of industry, you have a lot of room for connecting people in a local geographic area. Then there's, areas of the country where there wouldn't be a STEM company or a scientist or engineer locally available for, quite a distance. So in one way, that's why we also developed our teacher-led programs that we can support through teacher training. So again, we're trying to find ways around that. In terms of addressing disadvantage, I guess if a company asks us what school to support, we go to the disadvantaged list first.
Sorry. I know you said disadvantaged, Alice, but predominantly I'm talking about maybe special schools or children with a learning disability or a disability, as opposed to disadvantage, because and disadvantage is obviously a priority because we know that kids from a disadvantaged back. But I'm thinking more in terms of
using it more in the special educational needs.
Special education needs, and because a lot of our mainstream schools have children who are maybe statemented. Or and obviously a lot of this is emergent, but have you guys have you faced into this at this stage? Have you done any work in any of these schools, or have you a program that works?
Well, we don't have a separate program. So obviously, we're working in the mainstream system, let's call it that. So any class that we've had that includes a child that has some sort of additional need or a teacher sent me a message yesterday to say they're going to do a test of one of our lessons is about the senses and sight and Braille and how to make your own Braille activity. So she rang to say, oh, we really want to try this one because we have a couple of visually impaired children in the class and we really want to, bring them into the system, in a really supportive way that shows we can all solve problems together. So we've addressed it for the mainstream in our approach. I mean, if we had more funding and people and time, I would absolutely really focus on the development of one that would be piloted and tested with additional needs.
Well, I would appreciate that. I think, and you talked about the holistic approach, and I think a holistic approach would do that. To be fair, I think there should be something. If that could be something that is maybe picked up today, then just the final one. Then, and it's just in terms of the skills shortage that we have. We've an emerging skills shortage caused by a number of issues, and sadly we don't have. I was a butcher. I've said this 1,000 times. I was a butcher when I first started working, and there's a shortage of butchers at the moment. There's a shortage of engineers, mechanics. There's a shortage of joiners. There's a shortage of people that are doing seeking those vocations. Where does the program at the moment fit for those vocational type jobs? And I think there needs to be a change in the curriculum, by the way, and awarding the awards for the competencies in the academia that should sit alongside those. Does STEAM kind of complement that or not?
I think it absolutely complements, because as I was saying earlier, the programs aren't made to support academic achievement purely. The programs are made so that every child gets a chance to actively make, build, or try a variety of approaches in different subject areas. So we're not saying, even for engineering in a box, and I think Louth and Tiernan could probably support this from their side. If I'm in teaching that, I'm not saying everybody in this class, I want you to become engineers. I'm saying this is the field of engineering. There are all these amazing opportunities. People can plug into that at all different levels. And in every sector now, there are teams with diverse skill sets working together. So what we're trying to do at that age group is open their minds to different opportunities, not restrict it to, if you're an engineer, X, Y, and Z, you'll be happy, successful, etc. We're saying, what skills do you have? Let's try this. If you like this, there are different pathways forward.
Can I maybe just add a point to what Alice has said there?
Yes, go ahead, Louth.
Yep.
Yeah, just the thing, as I maybe mentioned a wee bit earlier, it puts things in a very real world perspective for the children. So when we talked about engineering, we talked about infrastructure, we talked about biomedical engineering, talked about electrical, we put that, but we were able to relate that not only in terms that the kids have seen, and I know some of the kids' parents, I know what their careers are, and some of them are, joiners, builders, whatever. But that being able to relate that to what they are learning in school and making that connection at that age, it starts. You can see the brain starting to take hold of that idea and say, "Oh, right, that's why I'm learning math. That's why I'm learning." The bits about science, even history. We were the kids in the class we were in on the first go had done a recent bit about Vikings. So when we talked about transport and infrastructure, we were talking about, well, look at the Vikings and their boats that you have learned about. So all of these things relate. But for me as an engineer, the big thing was that sort of design process or that problem solving process. That's not something that is restricted just to engineering. That is a key ability that you can take to any career path, regardless of what it is. Now, it doesn't have to just be engineering; it can be anything. It's that thing of you identify a problem, you come up with how you're going to that mentality of problem solving. That's nearly more so what the kids get out of this program than anything else. What's the thing in realism? But that thing of how I solve a problem, regardless of what my career in the future is going to be, that's the key bit I feel that they are taking away from this program and where the benefit is.
Thank you, Louth. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Robbie. Yeah, Louth, my party leader, Naomi Long, is a civil engineer, often references the learning taken from the design process and endeavours to apply it to the political process with varying levels of success in our context at times. But speaks highly of the relevance and the transferability of that design process that you set out there this morning, Louth. Thank you. Okay, can I bring in Nicola Brogan, MLA, and then Justin McNulty, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for coming along and for giving us that presentation. I think it's been a really, really interesting discussion. Most of my questions have been asked as well. I actually wanted to touch upon what Robbie just talked about maybe spreading this here kind of work out to children with special educational needs as well. Because when you went through your presentation, the first thing I thought about was children with sensory needs and how I think it would work really well with it. So I understand that you don't have a kind of separate resource for them, but I think it's something you should look at in the future if you had resources for special educational needs. And I know that these jobs are achievable. This kind of notion you have to go to a big city like Dublin or London or America. So I think it's that's really, really crucial to show these children they can. These jobs is achievable to do. The only kind of question I want to ask Ben, Alice, this would be best directed to you, is that historically STEM subjects were by females, by girls, and there was like a real push to try to STEM subjects. Do you still find that is the case? And do yourselves have any kind of do you specifically target girls to get into STEM subjects?
Thanks, Nicola.
Just before you come in on that, I'll just Nicola, your audio was patchy there in parts, but I think everybody would have got most of it. But just to summarise, that you'd obviously recognise the potential relevance to special educational needs and the positivity of the work that I've referred to in terms of communicating and inspiring children and young people that these jobs are locally accessible and achievable, being a really positive aspect of the programme. And then your final question to Alice there is obviously that historically it's been an identified challenge to particularly focus on inspiring girls into STEM and STEAM subjects, and whether that continues to be a challenge. Alice, thanks.
I suppose it does continue to still be a challenge. How we address that, we don't preferentially support anyone based on gender. We just support schools, and the more schools we can support, the better. Now, obviously, we recognise the challenge, but also at this age group, I think it is more positive to bring in diverse role models and give all children equal opportunities rather than picking them out separately. Because if we approach it from the perspective that, of course, there's no difference between boys and girls and how they learn or what their opportunities and potential might be later on, then that's the attitude that they will take. I would say also in my experience, children don't respond very differently to male or female role models. They respond much more so to interesting people who work with them to help them try things. So I think it is less of a problem in primary school at the age group that we're going in at, but I think that's a very foundational age to let kids know that there isn't a difference. You have the same, once we provide as a society the opportunities, the gender shouldn't be an issue. So I think the real issues on gender need to be addressed kind of at older age groups, in industry, in more societal decisions, rather than us kind of preferentially supporting girls. We obviously, it's about 50-50 at the moment in terms of schools. A lot of schools are mixed now, which is great. But again, we don't make any decisions essentially based on whether they're girls or boys.
Alice, could I say something just about inclusion in the class?
Okay, Alice.
Sorry, thank you. Sorry for interrupting. I just with regard to inclusion in the classroom, when you're in a class with children of various abilities, this STEAM resource is good because it's practical. So you're able to work in various groups, incorporating children of various abilities, and therefore it's very inclusive. So I'm sorry for interrupting, I just wanted that. said. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola.
No, that's okay. Yeah, thank you for that. And thanks, Alice. I do appreciate what you're saying there, but I suppose I'm not expecting you to sort of gender equality issues in the workplace with your one organisation, because that's a whole different kind of thing. But I suppose my point was about getting girls interested in these subjects as well as boys, because historically they weren't. It was kind of more focused on boys, not males. But I appreciate that you say that it's kind of 50-50 now. So that's a really good thing. That's all we can aim for, really. Apologies about the poor connection as well.
No worries.
Thanks, Nicola. Can I bring in Justin McNulty, MLA, please? Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. La Fela Podrick, Shona Dave. Happy St. Patrick's Day to all from Armagh City, the city of two St. Patrick's cathedrals. I'm in the Armagh Planetarium. Missed the memo, but have to say I'm feeling very Chris Hadfield. I'm feeling very Adam King. Send everybody a virtual hug. Have to thank the staff of the planetarium. Obviously, we got here and the meeting had been cancelled, but they facilitated us very warmly in their boardroom, myself and Robbie Butler, and they gave me a little gift, a book on Big Book of Experiments, which is very appropriate in terms of what we're discussing. And it's a shame we're not all here in person, because walking through this place, I am bedazzled, I am enthralled, I'm mesmerised. I'm brought back to my childhood when I came here first, and it's an amazing experience for every child to visit this place. And you can, even right outside this boardroom, you can hear the sounds of the children squealing and laughing and having fun. It's just a wonderful, wonderful place in Armagh City. And by the way, Armagh City is a wonderful place too. And did you know that Armagh City is currently vying to be the City of Culture for 2025, and what a wonderful jewel in the heart of our land that Armagh City is. And I welcome, and I say to anybody, come to Armagh City to experience it for yourself. The people, the bars, the restaurants, the museums, the libraries, the rhymers, the footballers, the hurlers, the camogie players, the rugby players, the hockey players. It's an amazing city of culture, amazing city of sport. Come to Armagh. Folks, I'm loving what I'm hearing today. I'm a Steam fan, and I am a civil engineer myself. And I'm curious to know, there was a comment made earlier in terms of your presentation around children's career aspirations are most influenced by who they know. Can you just broaden on that, please?
Well, it was a report done by the OECD that questioned children about their career paths, and these were the results of this particular report rather than ours. But I would say that it does fit with our experience. When we do questionnaires with the children, which are quite difficult to do without having leading questions, and how children answer questions is not in a sort of straightforward way that you can get adults to answer them. So it's a tricky business. But having said that, most children are still highly influenced by their parents and their teachers. And unless they have a broader spectrum in their immediate family, immediate community, or they have people, for example, going into their schools from different industries, their ideas and their awareness of the different work opportunities out there are actually quite limited. So that is one thing that we are focusing on by bringing people in, and that teachers really welcome the outside influence. Is it really, like as Loud said earlier, it puts a face and a career path and a real job and a real community into a context that they can understand and that they might not have encountered before.
Okay, the planetarium is, as I said, a mesmerizing experience for children and adults alike, and out of this world, outside the box thinking, right? Many of the careers that children will be participating in when they grow older don't currently exist. How important do you feel it is for children at their informative ages to visit places like Armagh Planetarium, and to what extent is that included on curriculums in terms of recommendations for visits, or do such things exist on curriculums in terms of how folks, you really should be bringing your children and young people to visit such places like the Armagh Planetarium?
Sinead, do you want to take that one?
Well, we obviously cover the topic of space, and then obviously being from Armagh, we would go to the planetarium, and we're lucky enough we can walk to the planetarium from the school I worked in, but a lot of schools do avail of the planetarium, and they've a wonderful, because it connects with the space topic. So yes, would be the answer to that.
But we'll say, Sinead, it's not specified on curricula, but schools are absolutely mad keen for visiting as many things as they can. Now, the problems with that are usually the cost of transport. So like Sinead says, if you're down the road from the planetarium, absolutely every single class in the school will go there. But if you're 4 hours away from a really, amazing example of science or tech or space, I mean, we've the Black Rock Observatory in Cork, so every school in Cork has been there. If you happen to live 100 miles away from something like that, then it's more challenging for you to go there. But absolutely, like, we would support. I've never met a school that didn't want to engage in more of these kind of opportunities.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the biggest obstacle to STEAM?
At the moment, funding capacity. So, to be perfectly honest, there's not a huge amount of profit in this, because the cost of time, I think, is the cost of time from both sides. So from the school side and from the company side. So Louth and Tierna will tell you they've put quite an investment, as well as paying for the programme and our support, quite an investment of their time, which is then out of their job, to go to the school. And there are no shortcuts to this. If you don't spend at least 5 to 10 hours with the children, you're not really doing the kind of deep interventions that we need to make the impacts that we have seen in the children over time. So, I mean, if I was to get a lot of funding from somewhere magically in the morning, I'd be in another 100 schools very fast. But getting the industries on board, from our perspective, it takes a lot of time as well. So it's really, from my perspective, as an individual company, our current capacity is limited. We're coming out of a pandemic like everybody else, supply chain issues, staff issues, all of those things. Also, then the opportunities for support from the Departments of Education or state, SFI, state supported initiatives, could be opened up a bit more, I think.
Okay, listen, thanks very much. Really, really interesting presentations, folks. Really enjoyed it. I just want to say, keep your stellar ambitions, keep aiming for the stars. Best luck all.
Thanks, Justin.
Justin, I'm actually delighted that you're at Armagh Planetarium today. Assembly business didn't quite allow it to be a safe or wise arrangement for us to make on this occasion, but I'm genuinely delighted that you and Robbie are there, and you have advocated so well for the fantastic Armagh Planetarium, and even your city of Armagh as well. I think Armagh Visitor Centre and Tourist Board have just contacted our clerk to sign you up for their next campaign, which is a good endorsement for you. I'm thinking of logging in from the Titanic Centre in East Belfast next week to level this up. But no, thanks for being there, Justin. And as you said, it's so relevant to the subject that we're covering today in terms of inspiring children and young people into those STEM subjects. And I see it firsthand myself with my two. They children do need inspired, as Louth touched on, I think, to know why they're doing maths, why they're doing these subjects, how they relate to the interesting, fascinating world of work, in order to inspire them to give their best and to learn those skills in a long-term way, rather than just to pass a test and then disconnect with that learning. So thanks genuinely for physically being there today, Justin, and connecting these things together in that way. I really appreciate it. I think that is an apt finish from our members. I think that's all members who've asked questions today. Folks, can I just say a huge thank you for taking the time to be with us today and for the work that you're doing. I think this can be an issue that the next Education Committee engages with. I know Diane Dodds, MLA, who it wasn't possible to be here today, is really, really interested in that 14 to 19 strategy and parity of esteem for pathways. And as you guys have shown today, that even preparing properly for 14 to 19 starts at primary, and being inspired in those subjects to make those choices and those pathway choices at 14 to 19 really well informed and inspired by the skills that are available. So I'm so grateful for the work you're doing. Really interested to see how we can roll out, mainstream, better support this approach. I think that's key. I think my interest in co-teaching is put to shame, Colette, when you advise you've been working on it for 20 years. But every day is a school day. And I think just shoring that up, as you say, in this slightly more collaborative, lesson planning together, delivering lessons together, rather than, someone comes in, gives a talk and leaves. I think that formalized approach is really important. So thank you so much for generating our interest today in this, and I'll try and make sure that the next Education Committee continues to engage with you on this. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks to Tuning Aloud for joining us, and Colette. And yeah, we'd love to come back and go to the planetarium with you. So
I think Justin will make sure that happens.
We'd be delighted.
Thanks very much, folks. All the best.
Thank you.
Okay. Can I ask Assembly Broadcasting to remove witnesses and to add members back into the spotlight, and ask our clerk to summarise any actions or requests resulting from the briefing, conscious that we do have 2 more briefings to take before close of play. Evening.
We do, Chair. So I must apologise to Justin and Robbie that they did not get the memo, but as you say, Chair, they did some excellent outreach.
I'm glad they didn't. I'm glad they didn't, Clerk.
Yeah, and I think some of us who did get the memo are envious of Setanta's astronaut there. Beautiful.
Yeah, I just fear where we'll all be logging in from next week to do our own promotional take on things. I could be at the Titanic Centre, Belfast, and dear knows where Mr. McCrossan will be promoting his own constituency.
Vahe, the heart of Tyrone.
I'll stop us there, Clark.
Okay. So, Chair, there was just a lot of great energy in that presentation this morning, and I think it speaks to a careers issue that members have heard about, several times, where there are particular subjects that pupils aren't connecting with, and it's because they don't feel relevant enough. Their education isn't feeling relevant enough to their lives. So that's really where STEAM seem to have an excellent model. They're populating the worldview of pupils with, players in their community and in industry who are using science, technology, arts and engineering, and they can then see why you would want to learn that. They stressed, as you said, the big 6 benefits. The idea that you need to equip children to solve problems, and that there are problems for humanity that will require our creativity and our expertise, such as the climate crisis, and they have their own box of tricks to start that experimentation. The committee has been trying to work out a theme with the Department for the Economy, and unfortunately that hasn't really got off the ground. As you say, the 14 to 19 strategy, the committee had scheduled a concurrent meeting with the Economy Committee about that, and it was cancelled. So I think that is one for the legacy report, that this is something the future Education Committee should take forward with the Economy Committee and look at how industry can use corporate social responsibility requirements to help schools to get in there and make this relevance and this multi-layered benefit a reality. Yeah. The Fair Start report as well has a strand about a whole community approach, and it's on that same level as the Deputy Chair mentioned. Where, children need to kind of see someone do something to feel inspired and feel that it's within their grasp as well, in terms of their aspirations. So, Chair, I think the legacy report and maybe also a recommendation to both ministers that they look into this kind of initiative in schools, pairing with industry.
Yeah, I think if members are content, it'd be good to write to the department to ask if they're aware of the programme and what similar programmes they're working with, what intention they have to scope a more formalised mainstreaming of this type of approach would be really good. Members content to agree those actions? Agreed?
Agreed, Chair.
Agree. Okay. As I say, folks, 2 more briefings here. One on an SL1, which should be straightforward, hopefully, and then raise on budget issues. So if members can remain for those, that would be really helpful. We'll move promptly through them. Okay. Agenda item 8 then, members, is the briefing on the SL1 for the Teachers' Pension Scheme, Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2022. Can I ask broadcasting to remove members and to add our witnesses and refer members to the SL1 Teacher Pension Scheme Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2022 at page 52 of your meeting packs. The Teachers Pension Scheme Amendment Regulations final draft at page 48 of tabled papers, and the explanatory memorandum at page 51 of tabled papers. Can I give a warm welcome to Mark Bailey, Director of Education Workforce Development at the Department of Education, and Brian Quinn, Head of Teachers' Pay and Pensions Team, Department of Education. You're very welcome. Thank you for your time with us today, and I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can you hear us okay?
Can indeed. Audio and visual spot on. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to provide an update on the proposed Teachers' Pension Scheme Amendment Regulations for Northern Ireland 2022. We had the benefit of hearing some of your previous session, and unlike that session on STEAM, I think sometimes it's a wee bit more difficult to get excited about pension matters. At least that is until the point whenever you actually get to that stage when they become much more sharp in focus. So you've already introduced, I'm Mark Bailey, and my colleague Brian is the pensions expert. So I've brought him along with me for all the difficult questions later on. By way of brief background, the regulations before the committee this morning introduced the prospective or forward-looking part of what has come to be known as the MacLeod remedy. This ensures the closure of the legacy 1998 Northern Ireland Teachers Superannuation Scheme to future accrual of benefits from the 1st of April 2022, and that all active members of that scheme are moved into the 2015 Northern Ireland Teachers Pension Scheme from the same date, with the 1st of April 22. So it's really about closure of the old scheme for the few teachers that are still remaining within it, and their movement into a new scheme. In April 15, following the Hutton review of public service pensions, new pension schemes were introduced for each of the public sector workforces. The reforms were implemented by regulations made under the Public Service Pensions Act, Northern Ireland from 2014. And as part of those 2015 reforms, those within 10 years of retirement remained in their legacy pension schemes, and that was effective from the 1st of April 2012, so they had 10 years in their legacy schemes from that date. This transitional protection was not a recommendation of the Hutton Review, but it was agreed following discussions with member representatives on a UK-wide basis. However, in December 2018, the Court of Appeal found in the MacLeod judgment that the transitional protection unlawfully discriminated against younger members of the judicial and firefighters' pension schemes, and also gave rise to indirect sex and race discrimination. The Supreme Court denied the government permission to appeal the Court of Appeal's judgment. On the 15th of July 2019, Chief Secretary to the Treasury's written ministerial statement set out that the GB government considered that the Court of Appeal's judgment had implications for all the public service pension schemes and planned to come forward with proposals to remedy the discrimination across all schemes. Legal advice confirms the identical transitional measures introduced for equivalent devolved schemes must be similarly remedied. Now, following a consultation run by the Department of Finance, it was confirmed that the legacy schemes would close on the 31st of March 2022, and affected members would be given a choice of which pension benefits they wish to receive for the period from the 1st of April 15 through until the 31st of March 22. And when the benefits are paid, they would have that choice. So this choice of pension benefits, when it becomes payable, is referred to as the Deferred Choice Underpin, or DCU, if you hear that referenced. The GB government brought forward the necessary primary legislation, which is the Public Service Pensions and Judicial Offices Act, which received royal assent just last week on the 10th of March 2022. The provisions of the Act are extended to Northern Ireland by means of a legislative consent motion. The Act puts in place a framework to address the discrimination identified by the Court of Appeal, both retrospectively and prospectively, and departments are required to make new pension scheme regulations to implement the remedy. The Department of Education has identified that 2 sets of scheme regulations are necessary to give effect to the requirements of the Act and make changes to scheme rules to implement the remedy. This proposed legislation implements the first stage or prospective of the MacLeod remedy for the Northern Ireland Teachers Pension Scheme by ensuring that from the 1st of April 2022, all active scheme members will accrue benefits for service only in the reformed scheme. The legislation will apply to all members who were in service on or before the 31st of March 2012 and who have service on or after the 1st of April 15, and that includes those with a qualifying break in service of less than 5 years. As the unlawful discrimination identified by the courts only applied to those who were in service on or before the 31st of March 2012, it's therefore only this group who are in scope for the remedy. The second set of scheme regulations to implement the second stage or retrospective of the remedy is under development and will be consulted on in due course. Our period of consultation on the regulations began on the 20th of December 2021 and it closed on the 13th of February 2022. The consultation document was published on the Department's website, and the Department notified those persons and their representatives which appear to the Department likely to be affected by the proposed amendment in accordance with Section 21 of the Public Service Pensions Act 2014. The Department received 6 responses to the consultation, 1 from an individual, 4 from teacher unions and 1 from a representative body. Respondents broadly agreed that the proposed regulations achieve the stated policy aims as outlined in the consultation document. The draft regulations remain as consulted on, aside from minor technical updates suggested by the Departmental Solicitor's Office. The substantive content of the regulations remains unchanged, and a consultation document outcome will be published on the Department of Education website. The Department of Education proposes to use the enabling powers conferred by Sections 1, 2 and 3 of the Public Service Pensions Act Northern Ireland 2014 to make this statutory rule, and this statutory rule is subject to the negative resolution procedure. The Department of Education has apologised to the examiner of statutory rules that this rule, which comes into force on the 1st of April 2022, is laid in breach of the 21-day rule. However, this rule could not have been made and laid sooner because it was dependent on the Public Services Pension and Judicial Offices Act 22, which only received royal assent last Thursday. So, Chair, just to conclude, I trust this oral briefing provides an overview of the proposed statutory rule, which is intended to come into effect from the 1st of April 2022, And myself and Brian, of course, are happy to answer any questions the committee may have at this stage.
Thanks for that, Mark. Appreciate the briefing and the timescales that have made life challenging for you. Just a couple of brief questions from me before I go to other members. Is it fair to say that this SL is at its heart designed to remedy age discrimination?
It is, yes. It's direct age discrimination is being addressed by the remedy.
Okay, and have you, which is obviously extremely necessary, have you had any concerns raised by any of the teaching unions? Are they engaged in this process and aware of it?
They are. This has been discussed over the last number of years at the Teachers' Pension Scheme Advisory Board, on which all of the stakeholders, the employers and unions are involved. And 4 of the 6 responses we had to consultation were from Northern Ireland teachers' unions.
And what was the nature of those responses?
They were broadly supportive of the approach in dealing with the remedy.
Okay, that's helpful. And you have the timescales in place now then to be able to take this forward, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I'll bring in other members at that point. Can I bring in Deputy Chairperson Pat Sheehan, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to our guests for that presentation. You effectively answered this in your presentation, but could you just, for clarity, tell us that no one is going to be disadvantaged by being moved from one scheme to the other? Thanks.
Yeah. All of the members will actually have the choice for the period of 2015 to 2022 of which pension scheme they want to take benefits for. So they certainly won't be disadvantaged by moving to the new scheme. All other members in terms of the pension scheme have already moved on to the career average scheme, and in due course when we come to the retrospection, the result will be that all members who are affected will get a choice of pension at the DCU that Mark referred to when it comes to the point of their retirement. So they'll be able to choose which is the most beneficial for them.
Okay, thanks for that. That's the only question I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Robin Newton, MLA, please. Thanks. Robin there. Okay, we can come back to Robin then. Can I bring in Daniel Crossan, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just a few brief questions. You tell us this legislation has no impact on the outcome of the department's screening, nor does it, in isolation, have any financial implications. What do you mean when you state the legislation has no impact on the outcome of the screening?
The equality screening took place, and as the remedy is intended to address direct discrimination, then it was screened out from doing the full equality impact assessment.
Okay. And while in isolation, this piece of legislation may have no financial implications, does it have financial consequences in any way?
That's a question that probably we can only answer after there's a full valuation done of the scheme in the future. There are a number of aspects that will come into play. For instance, inflation will have a large impact on the cost of the career average scheme as opposed to the final salary scheme. So only whenever the government actuaries do a full valuation of the scheme will we be able to say if there are long-term financial consequences of it.
So when will that be?
Well, the actuaries are currently carrying out the 2020 valuation of the scheme, which will be due for publication next year.
Okay. You mentioned the impact assessment there. Why was a full impact assessment not produced for these regulations?
For these particular regulations, they were screened out at the screening stage because they are intended to address an equality issue. Therefore, they're addressing a previous equality issue rather than causing an inequality impact on any group going forward.
And effectively, these regulations, once implemented, will enable the members who are in that 7-year window to choose, so they're actually potentially better off than they would be otherwise. So as Brian says, it's effectively trying or attempting to address a discrimination rather than cause further issues.
Right. Okay. The expanded memorandum tells us the regulations are considered compatible with Section 24 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998. Who's formed this particular judgment, and why are they considered human rights compliant?
We took advice from the Departmental Solicitor's Office in drafting of the regulations and of the documentation, and departmental solicitors would have confirmed that it's compliant. That's
good. Thank you. What difference will this make to the pensions of teachers who retire between 2015 and now?
The teachers who have already retired, that's a piece that will be covered in the retrospective piece of legislation that we will be bringing forward next year. There will be nuts and bolts to be sorted out in that, but in summary, those who were in service before 2012 and who have already retired, we will be contacting them with the alternative pension that they could have received had they moved to the alternative scheme, and at that point they will be able to make a choice as to whether they want to stay on the same pension they're on, or if the other version would be more advantageous to them.
Okay, that's helpful. What difference will this make to the pensions of teachers who are retiring on or before 2025?
Well, again, if they were in service before 2012, they will have a choice for the period of 2015 to 2022 of which version of the pension that they wish to take. So again, it won't disadvantage any teachers. It will give them choice as to what's the best option for them at the time of retirement.
Right, okay. And just, I suppose it might be the same. What difference will this make to the pensions of teachers retiring after the 10 years 2015 reform?
Well, again, it's a similar answer. If a teacher was in service at 2012, they will have that choice.
Okay, that's grand. Listen, thanks very much. That provides a fair amount of clarification. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Robbie Butler, MLA, please. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate that. And I've only one question because I think most of them have been answered. Is there any impact, and has it been assessed with regard to widows or in-service death pensions? I've had some communication with the Department of Education pensions branch in the past, and we have managed to get some issues ironed out in regard to it. So is there any implications with regard to that?
Yes. Any widows' pensions or dependents' pensions, or indeed ill health pensions that have been awarded will come within the scope of the retrospective regulations that we'll be bringing forward next year. And I know it's a very sensitive area for people, and it will have to be dealt with very sensitively. But we will have to contact the surviving beneficiaries of deceased members, and also those who have retired due to ill health, to advise them on the alternative pension that would be available and to ask them to make that choice as well.
Right. I genuinely appreciate that, and I'm grateful that it has been highlighted as an issue. So in terms of those communications with us, people, I think just for comfort, because I'm not going to ask any more questions, I think you've already said it, that those communications obviously need to be done in a very sensitive manner.
Yes.
So listen, if that has been flagged, then I'm more than content, and thank you for your answer. Thank you, Chair.
And that's one of the benefits of the pensions, the advisory board that we have, which has membered both employee and our employer and employee representatives, including trade unions, because generally they are consulted in a lot of those communications processes, which helps in terms of ensuring that they're appropriate to the individuals that receive them.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Robbie. Can I bring in Nicola Brogan, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for bringing that presentation there and outlining the details of that change in legislation. I have no questions for you, but I do appreciate you coming and sharing that information with us, so thank you.
Thanks, Nicola.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. Can I bring in Justin McNulty, MLA, please?
Chair, thank you very much for the presentation. No further questions.
Thanks, Justin. Okay, Mark and Brian, thanks very much for your presentation today and for providing us with that update. Wish you well with that issue.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. Okay, can I ask broadcasting to remove our witnesses and to add members back into the spotlight and keep them there? Clerk, any actions from the briefing?
Chair, I note that the witnesses advised that the actuary will report next year as to the financial consequences of the scheme as was, and I think members satisfied themselves of the equality implications of this remedy. So really all it remains is for the committee to agree to the SL1.
Okay, so is the committee content that the Department of Education proceeds with the Teachers' Pension Scheme Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2022? Agreed? Agreed, members? Agreed, thank you. Okay, members, that takes us to agenda item 9, which is our oral briefing from Research and Information Services on the budget. Can I ask broadcasting to remove members and to add our witness and direct members to the Research and Information Service briefing paper on public expenditure on education at page 57 of your meeting packs, and invite Christopher Rothwell from Assembly Research to brief the committee on the research paper. You're very welcome, Chris, is it? Yeah?
Chris, please.
Thanks. Similar. I share your experience. Chris, you're very welcome. Be delighted if you could brief us on your paper now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, so I'm going to briefly talk you through this paper, and this was prepared really for the purpose of looking at public expenditure available to education, both in this current financial year of 2021-22 and the period covered by the proposed draft executive budget for 22-25. It speaks to the facts that were known to us at the time of writing. I'm happy to take questions at the end if there's time, and if there's anything I don't know the answer to, well, I'm happy to come back to the committee with anything further on those. So I'll talk through the main 3 sections of this paper. So the first is, it sort of covers the allocations for education for this current financial year, and also looks at the outcome of the monitoring round for January just passed there. It looks at the funding identified for the department for 22-25 before the budget consultation was paused. And then it briefly addresses how funding was allocated previously when there was no executive sitting to approve a budget. You'll note throughout the paper that there were blue boxes, and these are really just to highlight any potential issues for consideration for the committee. So moving to section 1, this covers the 2021-22 allocations for education for this financial year that we're in at the moment. It's worth noting that at the time that budget was formed, the main focus of central and devolved government was really just dealing with the impact of COVID, and that's one of the reasons why the time frame for the formation of that budget was shortened. It was reduced to 1 year rather than a multi-year budget, but also the period between Chancellor spending review, draft budget, consultation, final budget was all drastically reduced. So in terms of the actual day-to-day spending budget, or what we call resource, the total allocation for all the departments was 12.9 billion. Education accounted for about 2.3 billion of that, or 18%, about 18%. That's the second largest. As I'm sure you know, health accounts for half of the resource budget all on its own. So that's in Table 1 of the paper. Table 3 in the paper shows the capital allocation for this current financial year. Of a total of 1.68 billion, education got 158, so that's just over 9%. Now, as the committee will be aware, budget allocations made at the beginning of financial years can be reviewed throughout the year during monitoring rounds. So that happens in June, October and January. And in each of those monitoring rounds, the Department of Finance will review the spending plans and priorities of departments and then rejig allocations to reflect those priorities if they need to. So informing that process of the monitoring rounds really are two different elements. So the first is departments giving up any unspent resources, or what they call reduced requirements, and then departments making bids for new allocations of funding. So looking at the outcome of the most recent of those monitoring round exercises in January, Table 5 in your papers shows that of the total of 203 million of reduced requirements, 41.2 of that was from the department. Most of that was the school surplus drawdown of 34.5 million. Table 6 looks at the second element, and that is to do with bids for resources. So there was a total of 183 million for bids for resource, and the department accounted for about 44 million of that. Now, with the executive collapsing in early February, the Minister of Finance paused the draft executive budget consultation process based on legal advice he'd received, as you'll know. So as it stands, no budget can be approved without the executive sitting. And during an update to the Assembly on the 15th of February, he noted that following the most recent monitoring rounds exercise, there was still £95 million of resource funding still unallocated. And that's just below the 104 million that he's allowed to carry over into the next financial year under what's called the Budget Exchange Scheme. So to avoid reaching that 104 million limit and exceeding it and potentially having to surrender some resource back to the Treasury, the Minister stated that he would like to allocate 45 million of that 95 million that was remaining. And that was to some departments, including education. So the Minister, on the 3rd of March, he confirmed that that 45 million could be allocated, and 13 of it was to go to the Department of Education for teachers' pay pressures. Section 2 of the paper then looks at the allocations or proposed allocations under the 2022-25 draft executive budget. So the figures in that section compare against the allocation for 21-22 as a baseline for comparison. So Table 7 shows that in each of the 3 years of that budget period between 22 and 25, that education, similar to this financial year, accounts for around 18% of the total resource budget, and again, health accounts for half, and by the end of that, I think it exceeds 50%. In terms of capital, again, education accounts for around 10% in each of the 3 years of that period. So in late February, our team, the Public Finance and Scrutiny Unit within RAISE, did a series of papers for the Finance Committee on the budget, and as part of that, we reached out to the various committees, statutory committees, and they kindly provided us with information on things that the committee might be concerned about, or their views on funding gaps and just general areas of concern relating to the formation of the budget for 2022-25. So in correspondence with this committee, Table 8 will show that the information we received showed that there would be a funding gap, an estimated funding gap for the Department of Education of more than 200 million for 2022-23. That then increases to 250 million and 310 million by the final year of the budget period. It's similar story for capital. So there's an estimated funding gap there of 58 million next year, and then 123, and then 98. So this information gathering exercise that we did with committees also highlighted some other issues or areas of concern of the committee. One of those was the proposed 2% reduction or efficiency saving that departments would have to make to allow the 10% uplift for health. And we've noted a couple of scrutiny points in the paper relating to that. Other areas of concern identified included COVID-19 safety, resourcing of schools, and SEND provision as well. We've also noted in this section of the paper the fact that the Integrated Education Bill passed within the last couple of weeks, passed its final stage, and that obviously will then have additional demands on funding so that it can be implemented. So that will require some planning over the course of the next financial year or financial years for each of the years that the budget covers. And then in section 3, the last section of the paper, we'll have noted previously in the previous 2 sections that there's currently no sitting executive to approve the proposed budget for 22-25. So this section looks at the past experience of managing public funding in the absence of the executive. So we refer specifically to 2017 to 2020, when the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland laid a budget for Northern Ireland instead of the executive. The purpose of that, while it allowed funding in public services to continue, obviously had its limitations in that it's intended as a short-term fix arising from political circumstances rather than a direct replacement, and obviously has restrictions in terms of medium and long-term planning and strategy. So the instruments that were relied, the statutory instruments that were relied on then, are mentioned in this section of the paper because they're now relevant in the present context. So those were section 59 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998, and that allows the Permanent Secretary of the Department of Finance to release cash and resources from the Northern Ireland Consolidated Fund. And then section 7 of the Government Resources and Accounts Act 2000 permits the use of those resources that have been released by departments then. So these have both been recently referenced by Department of Finance officials when they briefed the Finance Committee just in relation to potential funding arrangements for the next 2 or 3 years. So that's a brief overview of the 3 sections of the paper. So just to summarise, it looks at the allocations for the financial year we're in at the moment, summarises the outcome of the monitoring round in January, looks at the proposed allocations for the draft executive budget for 22-25, and then notes some of the recent political circumstances and how it may impact on funding and allocations going forward in the near future. So that concludes. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to take those if there's time.
Thanks very much for that, Chris. Really useful, given that the education budget, as stated by the Department of Education, is in financial crisis. I think updates from RAISE in relation to this detailed financial information will be a regular occurrence, hopefully, and are really helpful to the committee to continue to discharge its scrutiny and support role in relation to the important matter of financial resource for our education system and the children, young people and learners that it provides for. I'll try and get into questions quickly and bring other members in promptly too, but was interested by the reduced requirements referred to for the most recent January monitoring round, and the majority of the Department of Education reduced requirements was due to the school surplus drawdown, which accounted for £34.5 million. On the 19th of January, Department of Education officials speaking before the Committee for Education explained that the EA has banked school surpluses of £34.5 million for the Department of Finance as part of the January monitoring for drawdown by schools as required in future years. That was agreed by a previous executive many years ago, and it has been honoured that the department can draw down those amounts on behalf of schools throughout the year. In saying that, the money is not lost to the system, it is banked, and it will benefit schools in future years. Obviously, the department needs to secure budget cover in any individual year, but there is an executive commitment to schools being able to draw down from that fund. As well as that, it is deemed a reduced requirement at the centre in the Department of Finance, where the executive can allocate the money for other purposes. It is not actually lost. In saying that, it is not an easy thing to explain at a time when we are seeking additional resources for education. Can you illuminate that mechanism any further in terms of why £34.5 million would be held in that way?
That's a good question. So my understanding of that would be that I would say that the surplus drawdowns are regular, comes up regularly in correspondence from the department, and it's an established mechanism. But it's quite hard to explain why it's listed as a reduced requirement, when really my understanding of that would be that it's a reduced requirement because it's being handed back, I suppose, to the Department of Finance to reallocate, even though I suppose it's essentially it's protected. It's not, it's banked, and it's not going to be reallocated for some other purpose. We sort of included this quote from the officials to the committee, just to sort of restate it, because it is quite a large amount. But I suppose, essentially it's not actually a reduced requirement in that sense. It is just sort of being handed back, if that makes sense. It's not like a program that was funding was bid for that then wasn't used, if that makes sense. In the sense that some other departments had quite significant reduced requirements, and that was a result of, projects or support funding for COVID. It just didn't get used. It's not really in that sense.
Yeah, the DE officials stated that the EA is now forecasting an increasing surplus position of 34.513 billion across schools. The factors that contributed to this unprecedented quantum of increasing surplus includes, but is not limited to, the commitment provided to schools by the EA that COVID costs will be addressed from COVID earmarked funds, the inability of schools to plan to fully utilise the 30 million Senco earmarked fund due to the timing of the allocation in August and the availability, I presume that means, or lack thereof, of substitute cover, the inability of schools to access substitute cover, which directly impacted their ability to spend both ASB and other earmarked funds such as Engage funding, and the impact of the EA's change in approach to funding in-year growth in dual sites, which resulted in the EA making in-year allocations in respect of prior years. That sounds like a host of administrative challenges for our schools in terms of accessing funding that exists rather than funding not existing. Yeah.
That sounds fair. Yeah.
Okay, that's slightly concerning. Keen to bring other members in on the wide range of information that's available there. Deputy Chairperson Pat Sheehan, MLA. Is Pat still there? May have had to go on, actually. Robin Newton, MLA, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. And
Thanks, Robin.
can I thank Chris for his paper. As usual, it's to a very high standard. Can I suggest to you, Chair, that indeed every question, every issue that Chris has flagged up for consideration, that perhaps you would consider sending as a question to the Minister for answer, Chair. I think there are issues there which in the next mandate will be important for the committee to be made aware of. I haven't got a very detailed question. There are a couple of things that Chris have bugged me from we came back onto the committee, and indeed previously. The committee was extremely exercised in the early stages in and around the special educational needs area. And I have raised with the Finance Minister in particular why there isn't a budget line in and around the provision of funding specifically for special educational needs. And it seemed to me that historically special educational needs have lost out because it is a figure lumped in with the general provision of education. But yet we are increasing, or we're giving an additional 10% to health. And in special educational needs, it's not only the educational issue that is dealt with, it is the health of the child that is dealt with on a daily basis by the staff in the schools at the same time, and seems to me to be worthy of a budget line on its own and identified as such within budgets that are established. That's been a concern to me, Chair, since we came back. Really, my question lies on your last page, Chris, or your last 2 pages, where you start to outline some of your issues, and you haven't mentioned, as far as I can see, the First Start allocation. And is that not an allocation that is immediately available? Some of which I think has already been allocated, but is immediately available for clawdown by the department to address some of the, certainly some of the emotional and probably mental health and underachievement areas.
I'm not actually sure if that's immediately available or not. I know there are things that have been previously agreed by the executive that that because there were commitments that they may be available, or the funding may be available, or that commitment may still be honoured, even by the minister rather than requiring executive approval. I'm not sure if that is one of them. To be honest,
is it not the case that some has already been clawed down?
Of the Fair Start funding?
Yeah, that was my understanding. Some has already been. I don't think it's a large amount, but it is.
Yeah, I would need to double check that to confirm that, just to be sure of if that's the case, or if so, what the amount would be.
Okay. Okay. And in terms of what you're thinking about in terms of doing the analysis around special educational needs and the impact of investment in special educational needs in education and the health aspects of special educational needs.
Sorry, in terms of the impact of that funding, or in terms of the I suppose it would be. It would be between the department, or between the ministers of the 2 departments in question. If it's health and education, to sort of discuss. If it's not a line item in the budget at the moment, as you mentioned, if there's going to be any further discussion or reallocations or discussion around the budget and how funding's allocated, it might form part of those discussions. But in terms of how to assess the actual impact of that funding, that would probably be something for those ministers, their officials, to decide on.
Yeah, make it much easier to analyse the expenditure if it was a line within the budget and an allocation, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, I suppose with any sort of analysis of funding, that we do,
and indeed the fairness of the allocation as well.
Yeah, I suppose that would be a matter for the ministers to agree between them. But yeah, the more detailed information that's available, the easier it is to analyse where it's the effectiveness of it, I suppose. Yeah.
Okay, that's me, Chris, Chair. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Can I bring in Robbie Butler, MLA, please?
Hi, Chair. Thank you very much, Chris. That was a a really useful paper. I'll probably spend a little bit more time reading it, but there's one section, section 3, which is very useful. It mentions the NI report on capacity and capability in the non-land civil service. And this is a report which looked back into what happened when we didn't have an assembly for 3 years. And it looked at the learning from that and the impact that it had across the civil service, obviously, and we have to look at that from the education's perspective. And unfortunately, it looks like there's a possibility after the election that we may run into a similar period. So there are I hope not it's unfair in asking you, Chris, but it's in the paper. I did ask the department's finance director yesterday with regard to this in terms of if they are doing like a risk matrix on what's going to fall first and what is going to get cut. But I noticed that it does talk even about the integrated education bill. So this paper that's been put together very, very timely. Was there anything that jumped out at you in terms of the budgetary provisions and how the department then, in terms of how they're top slicing, what absolutely stands protected and ring fenced? And then was it identified in terms of all of those things, whether it's Fair Start, whether it is the review of education, whether it is the integrated education bill? What is isolated, or what do you believe to be at risk?
That's probably, the officials of the department will probably be the best to actually answer, the process for how they go about that. Those mechanisms for allocating the funding, where it allows 75% up to July of the coming financial year. How the departments decides which, like you say, which things make it through in that 75%. I wouldn't be able to say.
I think that's fair. The 75% obviously talks about last year's allocation too. It's 75% of last year, so there's and then obviously that's done through, I think, the Permanent Secretary of the Department of Finance, I think, has the power under Section 42 or whatever it's called. That's interesting. In terms of then the learning, in terms of maybe the audit office report and so on, did it identify any particular failures on any strategies, or obviously we have the education underachievement piece, which seems to have been a long standing piece that for me, whilst we see a baseline trajectory going up, which is good, but the gap remains the same between the high achievers and is there anything that was identified as that could be identified as suffering particularly?
Sorry, is this within the audit office report specifically?
Yeah. Or was it more strategic and high level?
Not that I'm aware of specifically for education. The sort of what we looked at most for this was really in terms of it's the audit office's recommendations and sort of discussion on the merits of longer term planning with budgets and that sort of area, rather than specific weaknesses or failings for individual departments, if that makes sense. So it was more around the shortcomings in single year budgets compared to multi-year and so on, and the lack of planning and alignment with longer term strategies.
Innovation and workforce planning and those type of things that they just literally grind to a halt because it is hand to mouth type stuff, I think, is really what I was getting from it. Yeah.
I suppose if you've got multi-year strategies, that becomes quite difficult to plan for. When you've got single year budgets, if you have multi-year strategies, it's quite difficult to plan ahead for those if you're getting single year budgets. So that's kind of the point that's making, really, is that if you've got a multi-year budget, it definitely enables longer term planning and strategic thinking.
Brilliant. No, listen, Chris, thank you so much for that. I'll turn to the report again because I've managed to get through it sort of 1.5 times so far, and I'm marking stuff up on it. It's very, very useful. So thanks for your work on that, and thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Robbie. Can I bring in Daniel McCrossan, MLA, please? Daniel there, okay? No. Okay, I'll move to Nicola Brogan, MLA, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Chris, for all the information. It's really, really useful. So thanks for pulling that together and for providing it to us today. I suppose it's clear from your research points that we've been making the last of weeks that the fact that there's no executive to make budgetary decisions, and the fact that we can't get the draft budget, the 3-year draft budget through, and then that there's no budget set out for 22 to 2023 is a real issue for lots of different services, and I've raised a number of different kind of specific issues in that. But one that I've been advocating for throughout my time as an MLA is the childcare sector. We know they were hit particularly hard during COVID, and they needed specific support to get them through that there. And I think in your report there it outlines that £10 million was allocated to them over those 2 years. And much of those funds came through the childcare temporary closure fund and the sustainability fund, which was almost like allocated retrospectively. So what I want to know is, will a decision to collapse the executive have an effect on that type of funding that is like allocated in an ad hoc kind of basis?
Apologies with unmuting myself there. Yeah, I suppose, the mechanisms that were sort of described there about how funding is allocated in the absence of an executive are really, like maintenance measures almost. They're there as intended as a short-term solution. So that, it's likely that measures like that are allocated in that way would be affected. Those are intended as short-term fixes, so that it's there's an incentive for an executive to be reformed or a budget to be properly consulted on and then agreed in its final form. So under those mechanisms there, we made the point that it's definitely going to hurt short-term, medium-term, long-term planning and allocation of funds properly. So yeah, I mean, without knowing the specifics, I suppose, of those specific, those funding streams, it's difficult to say. But for anything, it's going to become more difficult to actually allocate things properly based on departments or ministers' priorities, I would say.
Yeah. So in those kind of funds that are almost like emergency funds, it's going to create more difficulty because they don't have the powers there to kind of allocate it straight away, which is one concerning aspect. And then the other is, as you mentioned, kind of the long-term projects. So the likes of the childcare strategy, which we've learned has already been delayed because there's no budget for next year and there's no 3-year budget, and the children young people strategy, which will likely be implicated as well. So in your opinion, will the fact that there's no executive at the moment and no budget going through, will that have an effect on the lots of long-term projects like the childcare strategy and the children young people strategy?
Yeah, I mean, without knowing because the situation is quite recent, and there's discussions about the potential arrangements or legal advice is still ongoing on how the funding may or may not be allocated in the short term or across those 3 years. It's difficult to say, but it is it's obvious that it will affect it somehow. It's less than optimal compared to having an agreed final budget and a 3-year budget and an executive sitting to approve it and make those decisions. So yeah, I mean, I guess a lot will depend on the outcome of discussions on how things work going forward. For the next financial year at least.
Yeah, that's fair, Chris. Thank you for that there. It is very frustrating that we were so close to getting an actual budget years where proper plans could be written for all departments and for all sectors and for everybody in the north, and it is very, very frustrating that has been taken away from us. But listen, I really appreciate your help with that there and information. So thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Nicola. Can I bring in Justin McNulty, MLA, please?
Sure, thanks, Chris. Forensic analysis of the budget, so well done for your work, very professionally done. Chris, you talk of past experience from no executive. When was the last time there was no executive? What happened?
The period we referenced specifically in that paper was 2017 to 2020, so there was, rather than 3 single year budgets agreed by the executive or a multi-year budget agreed by the executive. It was 3 budget bills laid by the Secretary of State rather than an executive. So it was 2017 to 20. It was the 3 financial years in that period.
Okay, and what was the outcome, would you say, Chris? Was it a positive outcome for the people of the North in terms of children and families, for childcare, for the economy, but for education primarily, as we were speaking of education? Was it a positive outcome that we had no executive for 3 years?
It wouldn't really be for me to say, sort of comment on the the causes of that, or those mechanisms were there to kind of act as a next best thing in the absence of an executive agreeing a budget. And obviously the preference is always for an executive to be sitting to agree these things, and for funding to be allocated, to reflect to reflect the economic sort of circumstances in Northern Ireland. So it's those are the next best things, really. If they're,
well, I'm struggling with Chris. I guess what I'm struggling with, Chris, here is 3 years down was okay, but now we're 3 months down, and then you're monsters for doing that. So I'm trying to balance those two and trying to see how they can be possibly reconciled. I'm really, really struggling with it, and I'm actually quite angry about it. It may not look like I'm speaking quite calmly, but inside my blood is boiling how those two can be equated and reconciled, because they can't. They can't. What are the implications of the Assembly being down now for budgets going forward, Chris, from your perspective, helicopter view?
In terms of what the arrangements for the coming year, or just the impact of that in general?
Both.
Yeah, again, it's not really for me to say, to sort of comment on the decisions of the executive or ministers, but like I say, first, the most preferable option is having an executive to agree budgets, the complete consultation process, and agree a budget that reflects, input from each department and everybody that's consulted. And these measures are there to just ensure that public funding continues. They're not intended as direct replacements of a budget. They're designed as stopgaps. They're obviously not as preferable as having an executive to agree a proper final budget and a full consultation process. But it wouldn't be for me to comment on the process which led to that.
Okay, your briefing paper seems to suggest that in January monitoring round, all Department of Education bids for additional money were met. Am I correct in that assessment?
Yeah, that was in the minister's statement. So there was following that monitoring round, there was 95 million of resource unallocated, on a limit of 104, meaning that if there was 110 unallocated, 6 of that would have to go back to Treasury. So the minister in his statement said that he wanted to allocate 45, and he stated that 13 of that went to education, and that was in his words, there was the bid for teachers' pay pressures was fully met with that 13 million.
Okay, am I correct in suggesting that all the money asked for in relation to school maintenance funding was met too?
In the monitoring round, yes. So the bids for resource amount matched what was allocated. So it would suggest that everything that was bid for was allocated in that monitoring round.
And that's the same for SEN, for special educational needs?
Yeah, it should be. If the outcome of that was that everything that was bid for was allocated, then yes, it's if it's something that the committee wants to look at specifically, then I could take a look at the figures in more detail. But based on the statement that was made, all the allocations matched what was bid for in that monitoring round in January.
Okay, and in conducting your research, Chris, did you encounter a reason why the department did not look for more funding than it bid for?
Not that I'm aware of, or not something that we came across that I'm aware of when we were compiling the paper.
Okay, listen, Chris, thank you very much for your evidence today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. I think that's all, members. If anybody else wants to ask any other questions, just alert my attention. Thanks again, Chris, for that briefing. I know you will stick to facts rather than political interpretation, as you are required to do. I think it is extremely clear that the Department of Education has stated that education is in a financial crisis, and that that to collapse an executive during a time of financial crisis for education seems unconscionable. It is where we are, and we have to work to restore that as soon as possible. Members have identified some areas of key concerns, such as special educational needs provision, and as Nicola has said, it is my understanding also that the absence of an executive renders the Education Minister unable to allocate a budget necessary to progress the long overdue childcare strategy, which is vital to almost every way of life in Northern Ireland and is a key action for the Fair Start action plan, which we are aware is an executive priority. So, as I said at the outset, Chris, extremely helpful to have this information presented to us in the effective way you have, and I think that's something that the future Education Committee will want to return to on a regular basis. So we'll put you to good work. Thanks very much indeed, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks.
Okay, can I ask Broadcasting to remove our witness and to add members back into the spotlight? Clark, in terms of actions, the briefing paper contains a number of blue box suggested actions and questions. Can I propose and ask members if they're content that we take those questions from the blue boxes in the briefing papers and submit those as questions to the Education Minister via correspondence?
It doesn't take itself too seriously, you know.
Members consent? Agreed, yeah. Okay. Members might wish to mute their devices while they're not speaking to avoid background noise. Thanks. Clark, do you want to come in there with any other actions, please? Thanks.
Yeah, Chair, just given that it's the end of mandate, I think we should maybe make reference to the research paper in our legacy report as well, excuse me, and for transparency, make sure that our research reports, including this one, are available on the committee's website, committee's webpage rather. But yes, I think right to the ministers. And Robin had the additional point about health, part of the health funding pot being used to support SEN schools in particular. So I think we could represent that as well. So that's all I had.
Members content to agree those actions?
Chair, can just add to that. I know it is a bit of something I have an issue about, but I really don't see why special educational needs isn't a budget line. It seems to me that it would make it much easier to account for expenditure and analyse the expenditure if it was within either, and I don't know whether it's in the bailiwick of the Finance or the Educational Minister to make that decision. But it seemed to me, and I think we discovered this at the outset of our 2 years, Chair, after the 3 years that we were down, that indeed the principals, the school leaders in SEN schools felt that they were not getting a fair allocation of fundings or fair attention. And it would seem to me, for all of those reasons, that a budget line on special educational needs investment would make it much easier to carry out an analysis. And I combine that with the thinking that many of the features of the educational of pupils with special educational needs also require health attention as well. So for all of those reasons, Chair, I think it would be an appropriate thing to ask that consideration be given to it.
Members content for that to be added to the correspondence to the Minister? Yep.
Content.
Agreed, thank you. Clark, if I could maybe also just add specific questions on the reduced requirements returned in January included what appears to be in Table 5 of the research paper £3 million for the holiday food grant payments. It'd be good to know why £3 million for the holiday food grant payments were returned, given that we heard at our committee meeting yesterday that there is some concern with regards to the continuation of holiday food grant payments. And then also just to acknowledge that in the January monitoring there was £18 million allocated for special educational needs. But as Robin says, that's an ongoing item of concern for us. Members, any other actions they wish to add to that, or content to agree the actions set out? Agreed. Can I get an audible agreed, members?
Agreed.
Move on.
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, members, then agenda item 10 is any other business? No other business. Sorry, did someone come in there?
Just in relation to forward work plan, we did inquire whether the interim mental health champion might be available next week, and she would be to attend the committee's meeting if members wished to hear from her as an update on the pandemic.
Okay. Members, any views on that? Or I'm conscious that we're dealing with the legacy report. Agreeing that. But yes, if there's time, then we could schedule the mental health champion as well. Members want to come in on that?
Yep. I would like to that was Siobhan O'Neill still. I would like for her to come in and kind of get a briefing on that there. Obviously, I appreciate that time will be tight, so hopefully we can manage to do that and get the legacy report. But I think that would be really beneficial as we finish up the committee.
Okay, thanks for that. And Clark, it's my understanding that it might be possible for members that wish to attend in person to do so at room 30. Is that right?
Yes, Chair. Unfortunately, we can't get the Senate, which would accommodate the entire committee, but we have room 30, so we can run a hybrid meeting, and members have the option to come to the to Parliament buildings for the last meeting.
Okay. Members content with that forward plan for our final meeting next Wednesday, the 23rd of March at 9 a.m? Content? Okay, that will be our final meeting of the mandate. So if members can review that legacy report in advance, I think we've worked hard and we've worked effectively on a range of issues, and it's important that we reflect that in the legacy report for accountability, but also, as I said earlier, to guide the new Education Committee, which may have a different composition. So it is important that we endeavour to transition well in that regard. Okay, members, the next formal committee meeting, as I say, will be next Wednesday, the 23rd of March at 9 a.m. No other meetings around that, Clark? No Tuesday or Thursday meetings? No,
we haven't arranged any, Chair. So the only thing is that we did ask for the Permanent Secretary or the Minister to make themselves available if they have any opportunity between now and the end of next week.
We'll see what they say then. No problem. And members are welcome to dial in from other alternative venues as well then, including room 30 next week. Thanks, member. The committee meeting does now adjourn.